Philadelphia is steep in broadcast history. From the early pioneering days of broadcasting in the 1920s to today, Philadelphia has always been at the forefront. The Delaware Valley has been home to some of the best local programming in the country, starting with the early soap operas and children's shows to pioneering the best news formats in the country. Much of it all began right here. From radio announcers to television personalities, cameramen to directors, these were the broadcasters that burned up the airwaves. These were the pioneers of Philadelphia broadcasting.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of Pioneers of Philadelphia Broadcasting. My name is Mike Strug, and with me is a gentleman by the name of George Finkel. And in the interest of full disclosure, while George has done a number of things that have earned him a number of Emmys, my connection with George is we did the Mummers Parade together back in the early 90s.
Yes, we did.
George is one of the most honored directors and producers in our industry. And so I want to start, as I said, you've won Emmys for Olympics, for Super Bowl, for World Series.
I also have the highest rated basketball game in history with a 24 plus rating.
What game was that?
Magic against Bird, the NCAA final game in, I got to look up the year.
Had to be
in 79.
79.
In Utah.
Well, that's wonderful, but the thing that struck me is that your first job, and the one I want to talk about initially, was with Playboy magazine. So you went to the University of Michigan, you now come out, and
I had $300 in my pocket, I had a car, I drove to Chicago to stay with a fraternity brother, and there had been a letter at the administration at the U of M saying Playboy was looking for some young salespeople to sell local advertising. I didn't have a job, I didn't have any money. I went through a couple stations on the way down. I went to South Bend, went into Chicago, nothing there. I had an interview with Playboy, and they hired me as a local salesperson. I didn't go out of Chicago. I was going to stores, and I had a couple of the nightclubs.
You weren't hanging out with the bunnies and the playmates then?
Well, some of them worked in the office. Mm-hmm. There's some beautiful women. Hefner and I dated the same girl at the same time once.
Is that right?
Yeah.
He
won.
Yeah, I imagine. But then, and by the way, before we move too far away, you went to college. What was your idea? What career did you want to follow? What were you thinking about?
I started as a chem major and said, this really is not for me. And I switched to communications, which is what I graduated with honors in '58. Mm-hmm. And basically it was radio and television.
So you were looking for a job, and the Playmate thing, or the Playboy thing, not the Playmate thing.
Well, and so I
moved into television. Tell us
I sold a few ads here and there, and then they asked me to model for some of the ads in the magazine. I was in the magazine like 6 months in a row. They didn't have all that much money at that point. And so what they did was they would use the staff people as models. I modeled the first bunny golf shirt along with a Playmate. And I modeled we were having the first Playboy Jazz Festival, and I modeled a blazer and a straw hat for the ad that they were trying to sell these products.
Yeah, and while that may make those issues of Playboy collector's items, eventually Hefner wanted to do TV, and somehow you got involved in that.
Well, Hefner had a TV show. He wanted a TV show. It was the worst show ever done. But because I'd studied TV, they made me the syndication manager. And so I did it. I'm spiking tapes around the country and praying they get there on time, because there was no networking other than shipping.
Right.
And so they're shipping things, and I'm scheduling tapes moving around the country. Luckily, we didn't ever miss one.
Okay.
We were very fortunate. But then I happened to see a broadcast magazine. There was an ad for a station out in Rockford, Illinois, which is 90 minutes away from Chicago, which is where I was living. And so I called, got an interview, went out, drove out there, and was hired as an announcer director at TVO. Lasted for 3 years, met my first wife there and married her. I had my son, my first child, my son, in Rockford. And then after 3 years in Rockford as an announcer director, I decided it was time to see if there was anything else around. Got another copy of Broadcast Magazine, and there was an ad for Evansville, Indiana. Now, Rockford was run like a big station. We had weather, news, and sports at night, but we had 3 different announcers, each doing their individual show, and 3 different directors, each directing the different shows. So we would switch in the middle. You know, you'd have one director for the first show.
Were you working as a director at that point?
Yeah.
So you'd moved into
Yes.
directing. Okay.
I was quote unquote an announcer director, but mainly a director, which was fine. And it was great experience because you're doing all these different things. I mean, we had a big studio. We'd drive cars through for Swede Clark's used cars, and Swede would come in once a week, and we'd drive through, drive them through.
Yeah, George, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, because we all had those stories in our career of working at little stations and moving up. That is the very nature of our business.
Well, the nature of the beast at that time was you basically progressed by moving. And that's what I was doing.
And kind of learned the job at the same time.
Well, now Evansville was not nearly as big an operation. Evansville, I was doing somebody's local meat market commercials. I was on air talent for them, selling hog joel.
Is that right? Okay.
And what is this?
Okay, now let's move you to Philadelphia. So you leave.
Okay,
and you come to Philadelphia, and your first job here is at what was then WFIL, Channel 6, now WPBI.
Right, and it was not an operation that I was suited to. It was a very high pressure operation. I was there as a producer director.
This was years ago when it was still Triangle Publications.
Yes,
Walter
right.
Annenberg
Yeah,
owned
it was Triangle. It was Roger Klipp, and we were threatened every meeting we had. We got if you people can't do the job, we'll find somebody else who can. And I don't like that philosophy. Well, meanwhile, Larry Cooper, who was my boss at Channel 6, asked me if I wanted to go with him as production manager at a new UHF station. He was going to be station manager.
And the UHF stations had just come online?
That was when all 3 of them went on within 6 months.
17, 29, 48.
Right. And 2 of the 3 are still on. I think 48's gone.
I'm not sure. You may be right. I'm not sure what's
anyway, I went over with Larry, and we were in this god-awful studio out in Windwood.
Is it the old supermarket?
No, before the
that's
supermarket.
Okay.
It was it had been a religious station.
Yeah.
Percy somebody or other. It had been a religious station.
Yeah.
And we were out there then we put up a track around and drapes, and it worked, but there were times we didn't know if we were on the air or not because half the time we couldn't hear what was going on. It was a wonderful experience. It really was. And then we got into sports.
I was going to say, then they got the Phillies.
Well, at the end of my time there, we had the Phillies, but we did Temple football live. We did Palestra basketball. The first announcers were Bill Campbell and Richie Ashburn doing college basketball.
Ashburn did basketball. I didn't realize
Way
that.
back in the beginning. We do 50 doubleheaders a year out of the Palestra.
Wow.
And that was where I really got into sports television.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept going on. And we had bowling once a year, and we did a bowling tournament, and we did a tennis. But mainly it was college basketball and Temple football.
And at this point, are you mainly the director? Is that what you're doing at that point, or were you producing as well?
Through all that, well, the basketball, I was a producer / director. I was both.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were times when they cleared the Palestra because there were bomb scares, a couple times.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you handle that as a director? What do you do there?
We're going, what's going on, you
Yeah.
know? But it was exciting time, and I learned so much.
And that knowledge then carried you through as you move on to your next career or section of your career with NBC.
Right.
Now this is where the Emmys come in.
I was told by my boss at PHL to send it. This was when this was the beginning of the Phillies, early, and Jack Simon, who I had worked with from Sports Channel, we had hired him as a freelance director to direct the Philly games. And he was training 2 of our younger directors. So somebody upstairs decided that we should drop Simon and the money that we were spending with him, because our directors could probably do a game. Well, the quality is questionable, but at some point you take a flyer, and they did.
And it's cheaper.
So my boss told me to put out a memo that said, on a week from now, the game in St. Louis, so-and-so, one of our young kids, would direct the game, and we are not going to use Jack Simon any longer. So I put out the memo. And the world came down in shambles on top of me, saying, how dare you send out that memo? Now, I didn't do it out of my idea. My boss told me to do it. Mm-hmm.
But you suffered the consequences.
He never said anything. And they fired me. Okay. So
something good came of that.
I called NBC. Somebody gave me Jack Simon's, somebody gave me a name at NBC. And I went up and had an interview up in New York and didn't hear anything. And he, in the interview, Scotty Connell, who interviewed me, who was the one who was scheduling producers and directors, he told me, don't look at this as anything permanent. We're just looking for a few young producers and directors to do a couple of games, football games. I said, that's all right, I'll take my shot. And he said, we'll get back to you. Well, I didn't hear anything, and I didn't hear anything, and I didn't hear anything. I picked up the phone, I called his office, and I said, this is George Finkel. What's happening as far as producing or directing? And his secretary said, didn't he call you? He was supposed to call you. You've got the job.
Wow.
So I started. My first game was September 25th or something in Denver. There were 25 inches of snow in Denver on that date.
Wow.
And that was my first NBC football game.
And this was a temporary job that then lasted?
19 years. And it kept growing, obviously. It kept growing. I started with NFL football. As we came to the end of that first season, Scotty said, you want to do some baseball? I said, sure, I'd love to. So I produced, at that point, we had Saturday and Monday night. Saturday afternoon, Monday night. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, let me schedule you some baseball games. I had worked some baseball games with Jack Simon as for his other organization, and I was thrilled to do some NBC baseball. Well, that kept building and snowballing and whatnot, so I ended up with 6 Super Bowls in football, 6 World Series, 6 years of all kinds of things. And it just kept going and going. I did 5 Olympics, ended up with 3 Emmys, 1 for an Olympics doing where in Korea I did gymnastics. I got 1 for Super Bowl 13, which was maybe the greatest game ever played. Dallas 31, Pittsburgh 35. And it was the Jackie Smith drop in the end zone towards the end of the game that would have put Dallas ahead. Pittsburgh won.
And you also had a World Series as well. You got an Emmy for that.
Yeah, I did 5 World Series, including the Phillies, when the dogs and the horses came out on the field at the end of the last game. They were afraid of a riot. So
police dogs and horses.
Huh?
Police dogs and police horses.
The police dogs and mounted police. Mm-hmm. And they came out, and it was at the old field.
Right.
I've never been inside the new stadium.
Yeah, you're talking about that stadium as the old stadium, right?
And I've been inside the new football stadium, but I've never been inside the baseball stadium.
Okay, let's talk about directing for a moment.
But I did like 5, including 1 Emmy for Milwaukee and St. Louis, and our biggest problem was trying not to catch Harvey Keene spitting tobacco in the dugout.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in a second, but let me suggest my only experience directing was in a Lou Klein class at Temple University. After that, I never went in the booth, and whenever I did, I look at directors and think, how do you guys do all this? Everything's happening. You've got to make all these decisions. They're split-second decisions. And if you do it for a newscast, for example, well, you just roll the tape, roll the film, whatever, and go to camera 1 or camera 2. When you're doing sports, and you don't know what's going to happen or where it's going to happen.
You've got to plan.
Talk about that.
You've got to plan, and I don't have one with me. I didn't bring a chart, but you make up a chart. You have anywhere, like in a football game, you have anywhere basically at that level, you're going to have at least 4 or 5 cameras. You're going to have, we did one thing that CBS didn't. CBS used to put 2 cameras on the 50-yard line. We went to 20, 50, 20, which gives you more down the line of scrimmage than what CBS was doing. Now, I think they now have changed the other way. You also want a low camera preferably a cart because it gives you stability, and an end zone camera. And then you start adding on. You add the corner camera, another corner camera, another end zone camera. I mean,
yeah, but you're the director. How do you decide which camera am I going to go to? Here's a play I didn't expect. What do you do?
Well, you planned ahead to who's going to cover what primarily. And for example, I did 2 Stanley Cups, both the Flyers victories. And one of the greatest things that I've ever seen that we did was the last game of the first Stanley Cup the Flyers were in. Mm-hmm. And it was Kate Smith saying "God Bless It" before the game.
Sure.
When she was done singing, Orr and Esposito skated on the ice and presented her with flowers, which was just a great moment.
Right.
And then as the game progressed, at the open end, with the to the right, to the left of the goalie at the circle, face-off circle, in the third period, McLeish won a face-off, wound up, and we had a camera. Our mini camera was behind the net. The puck came from the face-off circle, right at the net, right at our mini cam, and that was the deciding goal for the Stanley Cup. One of the great moments I've ever done.
I don't remember what I had for breakfast, and you're remembering a shot back in 1974 or 75, a specific shot.
But it was so memorable. I mean, and then the fans went out. They flattened the roof of the announcer's limousine.
Really,
they jumped up on the limousine and flattened the top.
Those were exciting times here in Philadelphia, for sure.
But there are things like that you remember. Jackie Smith's drop in Super Bowl 13. I will never forget that. Or the Red Sox and the ball that goes through Pete's.
Oh.
And that was the World Series. We had to take away an MVP to Bruce Hurst because that one play changed everything.
Right.
Went through Runnels' legs.
I want to talk with you about some of the technology as well. So now you're a director. You are an Emmy award-winning director. And things change because the technology has changed. You're talking about the cameras. The cameras now can be the size. I just shot a video the other day with a camera the size of a pack of cigarettes, so that you no longer have these huge cameras.
That's a gimmick.
Yeah.
In most cases. I mean, yes, we put a camera on wires and we move it around the field.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about
the Steadicam.
The Steadicam.
The Steadicam, you have to be very careful because you don't want to affect a play. The first game that NBC used it, John Gonzalez and I did an Orange Bowl, and we had the Steadicam. CBS had it for Army Navy. They didn't want it really, and they just kind of didn't do anything with it. They barely used it. John and I sat down. We came up here, met with Garrett Brown, who I knew.
Yeah, Garrett Brown, for the audience, and obviously our audience has a sense, also invented the Steadicam. Then he came up with Steadicam.
And he did
and is a local guy.
We sat down with Garrett. He had tape of CBS's use on the Army-Navy game. He had taped live action and the Steadicam on all the plays.
The Steadicam, not Steadicam. Steadicam.
So we looked at it and we spent hours trying to figure out what we could do with the camera and how it could help us. And we thought we had to stay X number of yards ahead of the line of scrimmage. We didn't want to get the camera hit the football.
Yeah. Was the NFL concerned with that, saying?
Oh yeah, yes. the first demonstration that they did for the NFL for a Steadicam, they hit a goalpost and knocked it over.
The camera did.
Steadicam.
Oh, okay.
That's another story.
Yeah.
But we worked on what we could do with it. Stay behind to start. And in one case, there was a punt. The punt came up right at the camera and went down under the camera. It was a great shot.
Were you concerned at that point? Were you moving the camera back? Did you fear that you might?
But somebody, are you going to show that replay? And I said, you're damn right I am.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah, and it has changed the way we cover games, and there's an intimacy to those cameras.
The basic coverage has stayed primarily the same. I mean, things happen with live action. Digger Phelps, when he was coaching Notre Dame, we were doing a game at UCLA, Notre Dame and UCLA. Digger, at halftime, when he went off for the halftime, told my camera, my mini cam, to follow him. And he did. And so we shot inside the Notre Dame locker room for halftime.
Pretty good.
I really heard it from the PR director of Notre Dame. Why did you do that? I said, Digger motioned the camera in, not me.
Yeah, invited you in.
But you take these things when they happen.
Yeah. Clearly, the technology is changing. So, as I said to you, we shot a video recently with a camera the size of a pack of cigarettes. I don't know it's broadcast. Well, I was going to say I don't know if it's broadcast quality, but in fact, the stuff we're shooting on our telephones is broadcast quality. Certainly the stuff, well, it's as good as the stuff you were shooting 20 or 30 years ago. In any event, it is different. And what difference does it make?
There's no question, technically, things keep improving and improving and improving. Yeah. But when you talk about things like sports, you can get into places you couldn't get into at times. But the basics of covering a game are still what they were. You're still at least with NBC, we tried to have a camera basically down the line across the line of scrimmage, so which gives you a good angle. You see what happens. You see the line play. You see the backs coming in, etc.
But I would think the very fact that you now have less expensive cameras means you can have more cameras, which seems to have its greatest effect in replays, so that you're seeing it from a number of different angles. True.
I mean, that is true, that the more cameras that you have, the more different angles you can present. I mean, the first thing, like, you had the basics of something down the line of scrimmage, end zone, 90 degrees, and a sideline camera, low coverage. But then you had the mini cams moving around, which had limited ability of where they'd allow them to go. I mean, sometimes you were going, right on top of coaches and they didn't like that. No. Always. So, but yes, you can get other angles. The corner angle's interesting. Yeah. The back corner angle's interesting.
Speaking of interesting, let's end it up with this. You mentioned your concern about watching somebody spitting tobacco. Were there some moments that you regret where you say, boy, I shouldn't have taken that shot, I shouldn't have taken that shot? Was there one where you look back and say, oh my, that was a mistake?
Well, you pre-plan who's going to do what ahead of time.
But if somebody spits tobacco, you didn't plan that.
Oh, no. And that was just kind of a reaction of, if he looks like he's winding up, get off him.
Okay. That includes readjusting yourself.
No, that was something we had seen in the LCS. And back then I would go to the LCS games just to see what was going on.
And that was your rehearsal, if you will.
And if I was doing the World Series.
Yeah. Okay. George, I want to thank you. We've got to get out of here, but you've done it. It's just been so interesting talking with you. We've been talking with George Finkel, who's truly a pioneer, not only of Philadelphia broadcasting, but of broadcasting nationally with all those Emmys and all those distinguished moments at Super Bowls and World Series. Thank you.
And don't forget the Mummers with you.
Oh, and as far as I'm concerned, that was I was going to say the highlight of your career, but I think the Playmate thing may have been the highlight of your career. After that, it went downhill and ended up at the Mummers, where we had a great time doing that for, 5 years in the early 90s. George, thanks very much for being with us. Thank you very much for joining us.